So, hey folks, I'm Ibrahim Bashir. I am currently the SVP of Product Management at Entra, which builds legal intelligence for private market firms. But maybe a broader overview of my background. I've been building software for about 25 years. I've worked as an engineer, I've worked as an architect, I've worked as a consultant, and for the last 15 years, I've focused on product management as a discipline. Product
Wow.
management, if you don't know, is basically the idea of owning what to build, why to build it, how to win in the market, and to own that execution and delivery for product organization. And I would say my experience is pretty evenly split between consumer products. So some of the consumer products I've worked on are the Kindle at Amazon, which is a consumer electronics device. I worked on Twitter, when it was still around, as a communication platform. And then for about the last decade, I have worked on SaaS applications, so B2B software, where you are building and selling software for another knowledge worker to improve their productivity or reduce their risk or improve compliance or any other enterprise concern. So some of the enterprise software companies I've worked at include Box, which was a cloud content management platform,
Hmm.
Amplitude, which was a digital analytics solution, and now Entra. And in terms of why you may want to spend some time with me at Unscripted, I would say my real expertise is helping people ideate and bring to market new product ideas, whether that is a 0 to 1 product idea that you as an entrepreneur or startup founder are trying to incubate, or
Hmm.
you might be within a larger company trying to introduce new product lines and connect that to your existing offering. So I would say on both accounts, basically new product innovation and introduction is really my area of expertise, especially in a business to business context.
Business to business. Great. Um, if I may ask you starting questions, you said that you started with consumer products and then for the past decade you are mainly focused on SaaS products. What was that one thing that triggered or maybe the shift in your, this path? Was it like accidental or you plan to do it?
Yeah, it was definitely intentional on my part. I would say,
Okay.
in consumer products, the sad reality is most consumers won't use your product. There's very few products that actually get mainstream adoption. When you think about,
Mm.
the things that you and I might use, we have like an IBM compatible or MacBook laptop. I have Bose headphones here. There's certain consumer electronics that everybody's like, yes, I use those products, but most products are not mass market. And so after having
True.
worked on products that were used by
Mm.
millions, so like behind me is one of the Kindles I worked on, and then I worked at Twitter, which is hundreds of millions, billions of people. I started to realize there's
Died
very
down.
few consumer products beyond that scale that I could conceivably work on, number one.
I see.
Number two, I think I wouldn't say all product thinkers think this way, but a lot of product thinkers, the term that's used is you're the CEO of the product. And
Mm.
when you think like the CEO of the product, you don't just think about the product and the pixels. You think about how do people discover my product? How do they try my product? Why do they buy my product? What should the marketing be around my product? How do I support my product? Who implements my product? What is the cost to serve my product? You think about the entire end-to-end trajectory. So even
Right.
when I worked on consumer products, I used to think like that. I used to think, where are we producing our Kindles? How do you handle warranties? What happens if the screen cracks? How much battery is lost
Mm.
in transportation? So I really enjoy that 360 thinking around it. And long story short, when you're working on business products, that 360 thinking is expected because in business products, you're building for a person who's going to use your product, but you're selling to a different person who has to sign the purchase order, and you're dealing with different administrators and configuration people who are going to be responsible for deploying your product. So fundamentally, you're dealing with many, many different personas, and you end
Mm.
up thinking about marketing, messaging, pricing, packaging, support, implementation, partnerships. And so I just find B2B product development to be much more of a 360 role by necessity.
Right. Let's say, if someone is in this market that they are working on, the consumer products, and what would be the suggestion you would like to give them if they would just want to continue to how to survive from the single product to be able to make like the suite of products? Is it something that, they should, see their career moving on, or they would, it eventually have to go in a different direction?
I mean, if your question is about how to sort of manage your career, my best advice is think, 2, 3 steps ahead on where you want to be. So let's say you're
I
working in
see.
product. Is
Hmm.
your goal to be a chief product officer? Is your goal to be more of a GM? Is your goal to be a CEO? Is your goal just to
I
get
see.
product experience and try other functions? And then my
Mm.
best advice to people is take decisions in the next step and the next step that keep the door open for where you eventually want to go and don't close the door to where you want to go. Does that make sense? And so basically, you're slowly but surely working towards a larger goal and
Larger
avoiding
goal.
situations which will be dead ends.
Mm.
So for example, if you're in product, I mean, you can continue to do different kinds of product, but you can end up over specializing in a way that closes some doors down the road. And so that's my best advice is depending on where you are in your career, you may want to
Right.
keep the doors open. Now, you might, let's say, come out of college and join as an associate product manager and start working on financial services products. And you might say, I love financial services. And my entire
Mm.
career, I want to work on financial. I want to work on payments. I want to work on gateways. I want to work on fraud. Like this is my domain. That's also fine. Then I would say keep taking choices that get you deeper and deeper into the domain, right? Go work at a company that has a long history in financial technology. And so I think it's a
Right.
question of, do you know what you want to do? And by the way, if you don't want to know what
Yes.
you want to do, then keep
Uh-huh.
your options open.
That is actually a very good question because, when you actually, like you said, you really need to know what you want to do. But sometimes it's like that whatever you were thinking that I want to do this, once you start doing it or once starting going up that pattern, you realize, oh, I mean, this is not what I expected. So what is that was one misconception that you think most product managers do? Or something that something that they're leading towards the right path. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I want to know, how would
You
you
are,
know if
yeah.
I want this or not?
Yeah, I think a lot of product managers try to treat it like a playbook. They say, oh, I have
Right.
to do step A, then step B. And it's really not formulaic like that. You can't paint by numbers and sort of get to a path. So, a lot of times people will ping me and say, oh, I'm stuck at senior product manager. What is the one thing I have to do to get to principal product manager? And
Right.
there's more art than science there. And so I think that's one behavior I've seen is people think it's a very simple one, two, three. And there's so many different directions you can take it, which is a blessing and a curse, right? Because it's basically you could do product for a long time and really not
Hmm.
have your products find market fit, produce value, really take off. On the flip side, product is a role where you have a lot of optionality always available to you, right? You can go deeper into the tech, you can go deeper into the marketing, you can go towards the customer, and that optionality is not always available to other functions. So, for example, if you're an engineer and you're like, I'm very interested in the marketing and the pricing and packaging, people will say,
Mm.
hey, just worry about the code, right? But a
I
product
know.
person has the
Yeah.
options to go ask questions about anything because their role is
Okay.
360. And so I would
Mm.
say it's both the blessing and the curse. You can spend a lot of time and dabble in a lot of things. You could also end up just going in a big circle.
Got it. And what would you think? Like you're like really making my way of asking the next question. You said that they can or they cannot do it's up to them. But what do you think? What can make a product manager a good product manager?
Yeah.
If he was going into circle or if he wants to just know everything or just want to focus on something that he's doing by
Yeah.
himself.
I mean, the answer to your question is very simple. I think you get better as a product builder when you are
Okay.
given the opportunity to make decisions that require you to really test your judgment. Like that is the heart of product. People are like, I think this is what is happening in the world. This is the
Mm.
problem in the world, and I think this is the solution. And the more times you are presented with problem and get to build a solution and say, okay, I was right, I was wrong, or I was halfway there, the better you get at that kind of building. The corollary to that is a lot of product managers don't actually get to do that in the job. They're
Mm.
actually told what to do. They're told to,
Yeah.
hey, you
Yeah.
have two engineers and I need you to ship this next quarter. Why this? Why not that? How do I know this is the right thing? What are the other problems? Don't worry about that. So then you may have a product manager title, but you're really sort of a delivery agent, right? And so our industry is definitely changing in that with AI and sort of the way companies are operating, they want more of the original product management DNA. They want people who are like, it's much, much
Hands
easier to
on. Yeah.
collect data, to understand customers, to synthesize information. Now there's more time for you to actually make judgment calls. But I think a lot of people have not really gotten better at judgment making. They've just spent a lot of
Mm.
time on those operational tasks like collecting information and organizing information. And so I would say what makes a good product manager is more repetition of making high value calls. But unfortunately, a lot of people in the industry don't actually get those opportunities to do that.
And that's exactly like what would you suggest, because it's easy to say like, you can easily maneuver to from one country, not country,
Yeah.
one company to a different, but what would you suggest? How would they maneuver in situation like they feel stuck, they want to do more, they are not
Yeah.
getting the opportunity?
So I would say you have to take some risks. So this is not a simple big company, small company thing, but I
Mm,
think there are environments where you will be given the opportunity to try some risky things where you'll learn, and there will be opportunities where it's very strict and rigid, and you won't really get to experiment and you won't learn. Sometimes that falls into a small company, big company thing, but I would say what tends to happen is number one, in this day and age, and I think this is part of the themes at Open, is anybody can go start a product or build a company. I mean, literally, you don't need funding, you don't need engineers. You just need sort of a premium license to whatever Copilot tool you want to use, right? And you could probably prototype a product and find validation and get paying customers and then iterate from there. So number one
got it.
is go build, right? Actually
Mm,
go build. You can be a startup of one, number one. Number two, you can go work in smaller environments where there is too much to do. And so nobody will say, this is your job, this is not your job. They'll say everything is your job. As much time and bandwidth as you have, go learn, try things. So I think smaller companies support that, right? Third is
right.
even in larger companies, there are managers and leaders who will foster that, who will say, I will create opportunities for you to get big leverage opportunities. And so look
Mm,
for that. On the flip side, whether it's a startup or a large company, if it's a very fixed career path, if it's like, look, you
mm,
join 18 months later, you get promoted, doesn't matter if your performance is very good or very bad, it's kind of a paint by numbers. There's absolutely industries like that. I would avoid those. And if you're sort of managing your own career, I would sort of encourage you to ask questions, right? Ask questions about your managers, ask questions about your peers in the job, ask questions of people who had that job 2 years ago and moved on to something else, and say, did you find this environment a learning
mm,
environment, or do you find it a stifling environment? So that would be my advice. And like to take it all the way back to if you're graduating from college, let's say,
mm,
many years ago, the advice would be go to a larger company because they'll give you a structured career path. And
right.
now the advice would be if you go to a larger company, they will give you a structured career path. And maybe that's not
You
such
go
a
on
good
that.
thing,
Mhm.
right?
Do you always want to, so what advice would you give, just in general, the college graduates, like what should they start with, as a
Yeah. So my
beginning?
advice is like there's a top-down advice and a bottoms-up advice. My bottoms-up advice is what your floor is in terms of like financial flexibility, right? So I would say as much financial flexibility as you have, eliminate jobs that fall below that. And then as much latitude as you can get in terms of the breadth of the opportunity, do that. So for example, if you're graduating from college and you're like, I owe hundreds of thousands in loan and I just need a steady paycheck, I'd be like, your bar is pretty low. Like you need a large company, right? But if you're like, hey, I had scholarships and I'm lucky and I don't owe anybody anything and I have 2 years to try some crazy things, I'd be like, great, go found a company, go be employee number five and really try some things that have some latitude because you have some runway, right? And the reality is the deeper you get in
Very
your
interesting.
career, that runway becomes shorter and shorter. Your responsibilities just grow, and it's very hard to walk away from the money or the status or the constraints and be like, I'm going to go try something wild. There's a reason most founders are not, 40, 50, 60. It's because they're very settled in their life and they're less willing to take risks.
That is a very good point. I think I do have, I'm just gonna come meet you at the day of conference because I may have so many questions related to that. So being in this industry, what do you think is, do you see the trend that, the youngsters or, people like in the middle of their career, what do you think the trend is, becoming? Like people are willing to take risk or just, going straight to catch, becoming a founder, having a startup?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's a very big industry, and
Mm,
there's so many people that to try to say this is happening or not happening is kind of silly. In fact, anytime somebody says this is the trend, I
yeah.
get a little bit skeptical and say, I mean, do you have access to everybody's information and brain? I'll give you a simple example. I saw a
Yeah.
LinkedIn post. I won't name the company, but the person was a data scientist at a company and said, I've been looking at the data. Our company handles basically some payment method. And they're like, we
Mm,
are seeing more corporations expensing Saturday meals. And so what this means is everybody is working on Saturday now. This is the new standard in the Bay Area. And
okay.
FYI, if your company is not working on Saturdays, your company is falling behind. Okay, maybe.
Fair
When
enough.
you double click into the data, your company is processing like 0.001 of credit card transactions, right?
Mhm.
So maybe in your user base, you're seeing more Saturday usage. It's also possible your user base is a bunch of startups who are used to working Saturdays, and most companies are not, right? And so I think the old saying is if you torture the data enough, it will confess to anything. So I'm very careful about what is the
Yeah.
data telling me. And I'll get to my point, which is
Oh,
don't worry about the trends. The people who are going to do
Oh,
better
really?
in their career are
Okay.
going to say, what can I do with the job I have or the job I can get and maximize my learning? They're not sitting on LinkedIn saying, I wonder what the trend is. Oh, the trend is I should become an IC, not a manager. Let me give up my management job and become IC. You can't manage your career by trends. You can manage your career as yourself because the reality is you don't live by the trend. You are an
By the
individual one
trends.
and you have one career. So people might say, oh, this degree is hot. Should you go back to school? I don't know. That's a very personal decision, right? It's like, oh, this skill is hot. Should you abandon what you're doing and go learn something? Only you know if the skills you're accumulating are paying off or not, because it's never 100% or 0%. And so my advice is very much make it about you and your career instead of, oh, this trend is hot, right? Because if the trend
Interesting.
changes, who are you going to go blame?
Which it will eventually is. I mean,
Yeah.
but it also depends. Like, for example, I would take the example of, this AI trend. It has been
Yeah.
there. It's not like it just, pop up out of nowhere. We have been seeing different examples of AI, but now that's like, oh my God, everywhere. What do you
Yeah.
see? Like, is this the trend that you're gonna, just whatever field you're working in as a senior vice president or in the product management, you want to stick with your experience and want to follow the trend as well, or you want to build entirely something new? I mean,
Yeah, so I
you,
don't, I
yeah,
guess I disagree with the framing that you have to follow the trend or stick with what you're doing. It's kind of like
yeah,
saying, if I just think of the waves of technology over the last 30 years, there was a time where software used to come in a box in plastic, right? And then
right,
the web came along and you used web as a channel to deploy software. There was a time where transactions only happened in store and then e-commerce came along. There was a time when everybody managed their own data center, but then the cloud came along and on and on and on. And AI is another way of technology. So if you
absolutely,
go back in time, there were people who used to say, I'm a web PM. There were people who used to say, oh, I'm a cloud PM, right? But if you now look back, you're like, what does that even mean? Right. And so to
yeah, I
answer your question,
know.
I think what you should be
Yeah,
asking yourself is, one, do I believe this technology is here to stay? I think yes. Two, for the expertise I've developed, what does this technology mean? I think if you're in product
yeah,
and you're mid to senior career, it means a few different things. Number one, it means collecting, organizing, synthesizing, sharing information. You have a co-pilot now. So there's a simple AI you can use, which is like I'm using ChatGPT to draft my emails. I'm using Gemini to do my research. I'm using whatever is built into Outlook or Google Suites to make my work simpler and have an assistant, right? So number one, if you think that's important, is your job allowing you to do that? If your job is saying we don't use these tools, yeah, that's probably not a good job at this point. Number two, for the software you're building, is AI a core part of it? What you shouldn't do is say everybody's doing AI, I got to do that.
let's
Maybe
do it.
it's
Yeah.
not required. Maybe it's not the right solution for the job, right? It's kind of like I'm trying to think, in the early days of e-commerce, if somebody said everything has to be e-commerce, why? Like certain things are better served to e-commerce, things that people are like regular item, I know what it is, I don't need to check it out. But certain things people are like, yeah, I want to go in person and check this thing out, and physical retail still matters, right? So you have to answer that question in a second. And then the third is like any new technology, there's people who are working at the technology level. So in
Hmm.
the early days of the web, it's like, oh, I'm working on protocols, right? In the early
Hmm.
days of cloud, it's people who are like, I'm working on data center tech and storage and compute and sort of virtualizing all this stuff. Then I'd say if you can be at the front of any kind of technology wave, absolutely you're going to learn a lot and it'll probably be very lucrative for your career. But you have to have some domain expertise, right? And so if somebody's like, right now AI is very hot, you should go work at an AI company. I'm like, yeah, I think those AI companies are looking for people who are machine learning experts. So unless you just happen to have a PhD in that, it's probably you can't force your way into that,
Hard.
right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, if you did recently get a PhD in machine learning or data science, you would be silly to not go work at those companies, right? Because they are dying to get people like you.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, I mean, like, we tried to accomplish so much in this little time, and I would love people to come and talk to you in detail for, within that hour and a half, whatever they can get, from you. I'll let you go with this last question. What advice would you like to give to the college grads or people who are trying to shift their career, because it can be intimidating, and people who are in the middle of something and they're like, okay, let me try something new. What advice would you give them?
Yeah.
And then followed by what is that last thing that people would, you want people to remember from this meeting so that they can come talk to you?
Yeah. So I think there's two questions there. What
Yeah,
advice
there are
would
two questions.
college
Yeah.
grads? Look, it's your career. At the end of the day, it's your career. It's not your mom and dad's career. It's not the blogger's career, right? It's not the older venture capitalist career who's posting on LinkedIn. It's your career. So wherever it goes, at the end of the day, you are responsible for it. And if you want to be accountable for it, make your own decisions, number one. If you really, I'm not saying don't get advice from people, but at some point, whoever you get advice from, if you go back to them 14 years later and say, I'm very frustrated with my career, they'll be like, why did you listen to me? I'm just a random person, right? If you really want to talk to people who were in the same shoes very recently. So talk to people who went to your college and graduated a year ago and say, you must have been faced with the same decision. What was your calculus? What did you decide? What are you happy and unhappy about that situation? Right. And so I would say talk to people who are closer to your vantage point versus people who are very far away from it,
That's
number one.
behind. Okay.
And then as far as any reason sort of for the unscripted session to come talk to me, I think, if you want to just sounding board with somebody on where things might go and have open-ended conversations, I think I'm great. If you're looking for very definitive, do this, don't do that, I'm not really your guy because I just don't believe in absolutes. I have a very simple saying. Anytime somebody says always or never, I kind of stop listening because nothing is always and nothing is never. So
Nothing is an hour. That's true. That's a very valid point. All right, I think we're still under time. Rabia, I will let you maybe pose a question to Ibrahim if there is any. You're more than
Yeah, I
welcome.
think one thing that really piqued my interest was when he was mentioning to reduce the noise of trends and coming to a point where people have to identify what works for them.
yeah,
Question is coming from early career professionals when you do not have that kind of experience to understand what you
yeah,
really require. How do you differentiate the difference between the noise, the trends, and
yeah.
something that you actually need, considering that you do not always have the kind of guidance that you require to work on
Yeah.
the problem in that way?
So maybe I'll challenge the question a little bit. You don't have the experience, but you do have the critical thinking and analytical skills. Especially if you're a college graduate in the year 2025, I guarantee you spent the last 3 to 5 years really sharpening your critical thinking skills. In fact, college graduates are much better at that than somebody mid-career or senior career. At some point in your senior career, you're just like, oh, getting pulled from meeting to meeting, barely using your brain and just kind of offering pattern matching here and there. So number one, a college graduate has the best critical thinking of anybody. Number two, apply that critical thinking to whatever the trend being stated is. So if a person is saying the job market is going to lose 30% of jobs because of AI, I'd be like, okay, that's the headline. What is your data? Why do you believe this? What predictions have you made in the past? What is your accuracy record? I used to work at a company, I used to work at Amazon, and they had a bunch of leadership principles. And one of the principles was leaders are right a lot. That's it. Leaders are right a lot because leaders make a lot of judgment calls and you better be right. If you are wrong all the time, you're not a leader and you should stop talking. So my first question is check the source. Like whoever is talking, be like, is this a person who is generally an astute observer of markets and trends? Then they might be worth listening to. If they're just kind of a fly by night operation, you don't need to listen to them. Number one. Number two, if they are strong in their thinking, then you check their thinking. You don't have to apply experience. You have to say, do I intellectually agree with the data and the argument that is being presented as a critical analyst, right? That's number two. And then number three, you have an amazing peer group who also has that kind of brain. So be like, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? Right? Ask these peers because we is always smarter than me. So that would be my advice there is, don't take the trends as black and white, sort of dissect it yourself and debate it out. By the way,
Great.
people
Yeah.
in leadership positions who are very smart people are wrong every day. People are wrong about policy. They're wrong about technology. They're wrong about the financial markets. They're wrong all the time and nobody remembers. So, at some point I would say being wrong is not the worst thing in the world. At least own your decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's that's very inspiring, and I would definitely encourage people whoever is watching it to make a list of exact questions because the conversation can go at anywhere from one point. So well, thank you so much for your time, Ibrahim. We are so excited to see you on the day of forum, and definitely your time that you're going to be given. I mean, this we really appreciate that you're taking out the time from the day for 1.5 hour and a half the day of event, and I will see you on November 8th.